40 years ago, tragedy struck at the Welsh mining village of Aberfan. A mountain of coal slurry engulfed a school filled with small children.
They were just wiped out in one go, one strike.
In a matter of seconds, a generation died.
I shouted to my mates, run! And I just run like hell. Just thought I was going to be killed.
Images of Aberfan's terrible plight were seen around the world.
Eyewitness reports have described the scene.
The mothers were frantically clawing at whatever with their bare hands.
The story of Aberfan that has been handed down through the decades has been of a terrible accident visited upon an unsuspecting community, and of the government's failure to punish those responsible.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
But driven by grief, anger and guilt, the village fought for justice. What happened next taught the government a lesson and awoke in the people a sense of their own power.
I was a lot younger, quite hot-blooded, and didn't like no for an answer.
Is it what you want? What is it?
This is the untold story of Aberfan. It is October the 20th, 1966, in the Welsh mining village of Aberfan. It has been raining heavily for 2 days, but the local children don't mind. Tomorrow is the last day before the half-term holidays. 8-year-old Paul Davis is a pupil at Pantlas Junior School. At his house that evening, everything seems normal. Paul is busy with his crayons and coloured pens. His mother is watching television. She views his childish scribbling with only half an eye. In days to come, she would have good reason to see his drawing in a whole new light. Bernard Thomas counted Paul Davis as a friend. The following morning, as usual, Bernard and his mates made their way here. Today it is a memorial garden on the edge of the village. Back then, it was Pantlas Junior School. Where now there are trees, wide borders and birdsong, there were once desks, a playground, and the sound of children's laughter.
That particular Friday we were due to break up for the half-term holidays. We'd have a week off.
Bernard had met his friends on the way to school, little knowing the nightmare that lay ahead.
I didn't realise at that particular time that it would be the last time I'd see most of them alive.
We had the assembly, morning assembly, into the classrooms to start going about the daily routine.
Also at her desk as the school day began was 8-year-old Gaynor Madgwick.
We chatted to our friends, just a happy sort of feel to breaking up for that day.
The children in the rear classrooms had a view straight up the mountain. The skyline was dominated by 7 enormous piles of coal waste. Each day the village's children took their lessons in the shadow of these tips. Between the waste tips and the school lay the steep banks of a canal and railway, by then disused, but still carrying the Merthyr to Cardiff water main. As a 14-year-old, Howard Rees attended Pantlas Senior School. Their day started half an hour later, and so at 9 o'clock he was just setting off.
I've left my home for school. Drizzly, miserable day. Walked up the hill towards the school.
Howard was due to meet 3 friends, 2 of them teammates of his in the school's successful football team. A row of houses separated the junior and senior schools, and on a wall outside these sat his mates. By 9:15, there were 240 bright-eyed juniors sat at their desks. Hundreds of feet above them, tip number 7 started to slide. Through the window at the back of his class, Bernard could see what was headed their way.
I looked up this direction through the window. You could saw this slurry coming towards the school. I thought, oh, that'll stop outside.
But Howard Rees knew that the slurry was not going to stop. And approaching the corner of Moy Road, he could see that his 3 mates were in its direct path.
I shouted to my mates, run! And I just ran like hell in front of the senior school. Just thought I was going to be killed.
The windows and the walls at the back of the school were breached by the slurry.
It's just a terrible, terrible rumbling sound. It was like thunder, but 1,000 times louder than that.
Tip number 7 had collapsed, sending thousands of tons of foul coal waste crashing onto the junior school below. Standing today in what was then his classroom, Bernard recalls how the wave of slurry engulfed the room, picking him up and carrying him along.
The slurry hit the outer wall of the school, started engulfing the room, and I was literally just lifted up and transported with this stuff from over this area to over here.
The school was struck by the landslide just after morning prayers. The children should have begun their half-term holiday this afternoon.
Among the first on the scene was local colliery worker Enos Sims.
The mothers were frantically clawing at whatever with their bare hands, literally with their bare hands. A lot of them had only just left their children into the school, and as mothers do, they congregate after and have a chat. So they were actually on site as it happened.
The word went out. The children were in mortal peril. Volunteers streamed in, desperate to do what they could.
In a short space of time, literally thousands, I would say, milling around in the general area.
Eyewitness reports describe the scene as resembling an earthquake or the aftermath of a high explosive bomb. One teacher said she heard a big rumbling sound and shouted to the children to get under their desks. Split seconds later, the classroom walls cracked and collapsed.
Sitting at her desk, 8-year-old Gaynor Madgwick had been knocked unconscious by the force of the slide.
I woke up at the corner of the classroom at the back, so I must have been pushed right up to the back. There was a radiator which had fallen off the wall, which had broke my legs. Couldn't feel my legs and couldn't see my legs either, and I started crying then.
The school was there. That's all you could see was the rooftop of it. All the houses were covered. The school was buried in, more or less.
Howard had seen his mates disappear under the black tidal wave. He returned to try and find them.
You just trying to remember where they were. And roughly about where this light is here. When I eventually got back to the spot where they were, he was just digging with your hands, you know. But it was too late. They'd gone.
At 9:15, some of the people who lived in the houses over there said that they heard a noise like an aircraft crashing. The tree went right through the school. One woman who saw 3 little boys sitting on the school wall. They hadn't gone into school. A moment later, they disappeared and they haven't been seen since.
The row of houses between the junior and senior schools had been swept away, and with it, Howard's friends. In that same terrace lived 25-year-old miner from Merthyr Vale Colliery, Gerald Tarr. He had worked the previous night and had been in bed asleep when the disaster struck.
Come on, boy. I had a big dog, Buster his name was. He boned it upstairs that morning. crashed into the bedroom. His ears was sticking up in the air, like if there was something wrong. I knew there was something wrong. So as I went to talk to the dog, the ceiling cracked open, the bedroom wall behind me, come down and tumbled on top of me, crushing me into the bed. I worked underground for 13 years, so I knew I was buried, like, you know. I knew I was under it, like.
Confronted with the scale of the tragedy, reporters were at a loss what to ask.
I had intended to go along and talk to some of the parents there. But how can you look at a miner with tears streaming down his eyes as he digs away with his bare hands, and you say, "Are you here for a personal reason?" And he says, "By God I am, son. I've got 3 boys down here."
Still stuck with most of her classmates was Gaynor Madgwick.
The wall had opened behind me. There was a child's arm from the elbow hanging through from the other classroom into my classroom, but the arm was sort of hanging where my shoulder was. And I remember hanging on to this hand and pinching the hand to see if the person was alive, the child was alive. But obviously there was no reactions.
I managed to sit up. There was nothing actually trapping me, so I sat up and I looked around and saw my teacher.
Bernard's teacher helped him through one of the classroom's high windows and out into the corridor.
And then to one of the main windows of the hall on the side of the room, which had been opened. It had been opened up and out onto the windowsill and down.
Bernard was one of the lucky ones, but the death toll was rising by the minute. Pictures of Aberfan's desperate plight flickered in front rooms across the land.
How many bodies have you brought out?
To the time I came up, which was roughly 15 minutes ago, there were 21. But I'm sorry to say there's still about 110 or 115 or even a few more who still have to be got out. And this is going to take quite a time.
Aberfan became Britain's first televised disaster. Rescuers finally freed Gaynor from beneath the radiator.
I remember my leg was just like if it didn't belong to me. It was just all twisted and it was just basically hanging. But then it was like a chain. I had to be handed through the window to someone else. At 8 years of age, you can't comprehend the enormous chaos that was in that one room alone.
Lying in the wreckage of his house, Gerald Tarr was pinned beneath a door.
It left me a little bit of room to breathe. Of course, the air was running out, like the oxygen was running out, and I knew I was dying because my tongue started to swell, my lips started to swell, my throat was going dry, and I knew that the oxygen was going out. I was more or less on my bike like that.
At once, Gerald Tarr became aware of a voice above him.
I could hear him on top of me shouting, "I think there's somebody under here," and of course I was screaming. I was screaming my head off. I thought, well, why can't he hear me, you know? I didn't have no air. I didn't have no air in my lungs, sort of thing, so he couldn't hear me.
Gerald's desperate cries were eventually heard. But on its way down the mountain, the deadly slide had smashed over the canal bank behind the school. In doing so, it had fractured the Merthyr to Cardiff water main.
The pipe burst, and I could hear the other firemen shouting, "If you don't get him out now, he's going to drown." So, of course, I was going a bit mental, and I was trying to dig myself out from under the door with my one hand. And I was just taking the nails off my fingers trying to get from under this door, you know.
Before the torrent could reach him, Gerald was freed with heavy lifting gear. His injuries were to keep him in hospital for many weeks. By now, everyone who could be there was there. One parent who could not was Cledwyn Davis. He was at home recovering from a serious illness. He had 2 boys at Pantglas Junior.
I knew there was something pretty serious when my You know that I lost a young lad. Well, the other lad who was in school, younger, when he came up the road towards the house, and I saw him coming, and he was covered in a black, messy slurry, but he'd managed to get out of the school.
Cledd's oldest son, Gareth, was among those who had not got out. What had begun as a rescue effort was now just an exercise in retrieving the dead.
Never in my life have I ever seen anything like this. I hope that I shall never ever see anything like it again. This is one of many valleys in South Wales, in the South Wales coalfield tonight. It's a very special valley. It's a valley that contains death.
To go through that, like, I'd have gone through it 1,000 times if I could save a few kids, like, I'll be honest with you. There's nothing worse than losing a child, like. You know, you lose your house, bricks and mortar, you can replace bricks and mortar or furniture, you can put back. You can't put a child back, can you? You know.
This is really a map of the village surrounding the area of Pantglas Junior School, all of which suffered fatalities, of course. The school is here, and the tips would have been up in this sort of area.
The mining communities of South Wales lived with death, but this time the pit had come to claim the miners' children. A mass funeral took place days later. It wasn't just that the victims were so young. The roll call of the dead showed fatalities in almost every street.
Roughly 3 to 5 there. My street, about 5 from the next street, 3 from the front, 3 from Pantglas Road, 10 from Moy Road, Aberfan Road, approximately 7, 2 from Barrington Street. One from Irvine Street, 1 or 2 from Macintosh Street. There's 2 from Angus Street. Cotterell Street, which leads off Angus Street, there were approximately 8. There was any streets that weren't affected in some way or other, sort of 1 or 2 losses.
The world wept with Aberfan as it buried a generation of its children. In all, 116 children and 28 adults perished in the black slurry of Aberfan. Among the coffins lowered into the earth had been that of 8-year-old Paul Davis. Weeks later, his mother was going through a drawer in their home in Aberfan. She came across the drawing that her son had been doing the night before the disaster that claimed his life. She saw in his scribbles a warning that the village was in peril. This echoed talk locally. For years, residents said the coal board had been warned about tip number 7. With its pit complex and its waste tips, Aberfan was a Welsh mining village like many others. The place only existed because of the mine. The coal board were more than employers, and the man at the top, Lord Robins, was more than a boss. But, recalls his wife, Lady Eva Robins, now in her 90s, he truly appreciated what the miners did.
Oh, we loved the miners. He'd say, my God, those amazing men. What they put up with down there, God alone knows. And he said every piece of coal used today is got at the expense of one of those men. Oh yes, he was committed to the miners.
The feeling was mutual. Coal was a nationalized but dying industry, being overtaken by oil and nuclear power. Robins, a former top Labour politician, was leading the fight against the government's closure program, which threatened every pit in the land. He and Lady Robins flew down to Aberfan the day after the disaster.
The atmosphere, it was calamitous. It was the most tragic feeling in the world. There was nobody literally talking to anybody. Alfred was whisked away.
Lord Robins inspected the site. What had caused tip number 7 to fail? Quickly an answer emerged. Water.
When the slurry is dry, it's a fine black powder. It's made of coal and of shale, the waste products of the industry. But when it gets wet, then the slurry changes into a thick black mud with the consistency of molten chocolate.
There had been a natural spring in the center of the tip, and the wetter the tip got, the less stable it became. On that day, the slurry reached saturation point. The tip collapsed. But was anybody to blame? In Aberfan, Lord Robins was cornered by the press.
You have a moment, Lord Robins.
About the slide, can I ask you a few questions?
Does the coal board have any responsibility for this slide happening? I would not myself have thought that anyone would know that there was a spring deep in the heart of the mountain, any more than I could tell you that there is one under our feet where we are now. But if you are asking if my people on the spot knew that there was spring water, then the answer is no, they could not possibly know.
But was it possible to know the tip was dangerous, sir?
It was impossible to know that there was a spring at the heart of the tip, turning the centre of the mountain into slush.
Want some more questions, sir?
News of what Lord Robins had said spread around Aberfan. The villagers thought they detected the whiff of whitewash, because the existence of the spring was common knowledge. Prime Minister Harold Wilson had gone straight to Aberfan on the day of the disaster. He had earlier issued a remarkable order to his Minister for Power, Richard Marsh.
Wilson had said, you've got my authority to authorise anything that you want. Forget the cost, forget the protocol, tell them they can do it, whatever it is.
The Labour governments at the time had their foundations in places like Aberfan. The miners were their people. Villagers who encountered Wilson on his visit say he saw the tips towering over the village and declared, "Those must go." Wilson had returned to Chequers at 2:30 the following morning. He had apparently been deeply moved by what he had seen. He later wrote describing the murderous muck that still covered his shoes. It was, he said, several weeks before he could bring himself to clean them, and longer still before he could wear them. The villagers felt promises had been made. Helping Aberfan in its hour of need was an absolute priority. But as far as many in the village are concerned, The story of Aberfan is a story of promises broken. In the village, grief had turned to anger. The bereaved wanted two things. They wanted the remaining tips gone, and they wanted to know why their children had died. A tribunal of inquiry was set up in Merthyr Tydfil, 6 miles away, the evidence to be heard by a 3-man panel. This was Aberfan against the mighty National Coal Board. Many in the village anticipated a cover-up, and indeed the board's attitude was obstructive from the off. Their council contested everything.
My lord, it is not in my submission for the Coal Board to concede anything before a tribunal which is inquiring into these matters.
Fearing justice would be a casualty of the board's dominance of South Wales, the villagers had hired a London QC. His name, Desmond Ackner.
Well, I knew I was appearing for the little people, so to speak, and that the Coal Board was a pretty powerful organisation. So it was a bit of a David and Goliath situation, which I enjoyed.
Early on, the tribunal identified the spring at the heart of the tip as the basic cause of the disaster. On his visit to Aberfan, Lord Robens had asserted that the spring had been unknown. If it was true that nobody knew, then the Coal Board could not be blamed.
How the Coal Board can say they know the collection of the stream up there, well, it's beyond me, because it was there. I know it because we used to go up there. There's a stream coming down a mountain, and we dammed it up as a swimming pool. Yeah.
When Howard and his friends had swum there, tip number 7 had loomed high above the spring. But as the tipping continued, the spring was buried.
Everybody in this village knew that the Coal Board was tipping on that stream.
So why had Lord Robens insisted that the spring was unknown?
Under our feet where we are now.
Desmond Ackner was in no doubt.
The suggestion that no one could have been aware of the stream underneath the tip was so palpably wrong. This was a sort of off-the-cuff attempt to brush aside any suggestion the Coal Board was to blame.
In any site investigation, he would examine.
But the story of Aberfan is more complicated than one of all-powerful Coal Board versus downtrodden villagers. Buried within the transcripts of the tribunal are some exchanges that reveal a less comfortable truth. Before the dead were buried, fingers had pointed up the mountain at the gang of tippers whose crane had, day in, day out, emptied the trucks full of coal waste onto tip number 7.
Inevitably and obviously,
The tip had moved before. The suspicion that this gang, ordinary villagers themselves, had known the tip was dangerous but done nothing about it, made them hated men. All were subjected to abuse. Some were attacked.
I swear by Almighty God, the evidence I shall give be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth.
Did it ever occur to you, Mr. Jones, after you returned to work and seen the effects of the 1963 slip, that it would only require a slip of slightly larger proportions to bring that stuff down into the village?
I didn't think it would ever reach the village. I thought it might hit the banker sometime, or near the bank, but never the village, no.
So you thought it might get as far as the bank?
I thought it might hit the bank, yes.
That is the canal bank, of course?
The canal bank, my lord, yes.
Did you discuss with anybody else the thought that the tip might reach the canal bank?
Never really discussed it, no. We have remarked about it now and again.
Where? On the tip? In the club?
On the tip, in the village, in the club, in the pub, a good many places.
Well, what sort of remark was being made by you?
The remarks that were given to me were in a light-hearted manner by a good many, and I gave the same answer back.
You mean there was some light-hearted talk about the possibility of the tip coming into the village?
Not exactly in the village, no. Light-hearted talk about carry on tipping there and it'd be in the club, or carry on tipping, it'd be in Bryn Taff. That kind of talk. Nothing serious.
But there were others who had taken the issue seriously. Tribunal records revealed that Merthyr Borough Council had, for years, been aware of the danger presented by the tips. In fact, they had written many letters to the National Coal Board to complain, warning specifically about the danger of dumping coal slurry behind the Pant-class schools. But news of the council's well-founded fears went no further up the NCB than the desk of Area Mechanical Engineer David Roberts. He should have passed them up the line. Had he done so, an inspection might have been made, and nobody would ever have heard of Aberfan. As it was, no action was ever taken. Not even when he received a letter warning that if the tips moved, a very serious position would accrue.
I was shocked about things that came out concerning the period previous to the disaster and the dangers that were, to some extent, evident before it actually happened.
Tip slides were not rare in South Wales. Just a year before the Aberfan disaster, another slide had led to a coal board memo ordering tips be inspected. This order landed on the desks of two local coal board employees. One was Robert Exley, the area civil engineer. The other was area mechanical engineer David Roberts. Though competent engineers, the two were at loggerheads. The thorough inspection expected of them would have shown up the irregular shape of the tip. But there was no proper inspection, and there was no proper report. Tipping continued. The members of the tribunal made their own inspection of the site. What was becoming plain was that the National Coal Board had no tipping policy. The inquiry ground on. Days turned into weeks, which turned into months. Such concessions as there were had to be wrung out of the Coal Board witnesses by Desmond Ackner.
We have been subjected day after day to the farce of hearing National Coal Board witnesses examined, first of all by their counsel, at the end of which they would have appeared to a stranger as if the board had no more blamable connection with this disaster than, say, the gas board.
But Desmond Ackner was winning, and the villagers sensed it.
I saw him and listened to him at the tribunal. He was very impressive. Yes, he was something special, actually.
And there was something special happening in the village. So moved had the world been at Aberfan's plight that gifts and cash had come in by the van load. The Aberfan Appeal Fund topped £1.75 million. The children went back to school, but not at Pantglas, which was razed to the ground. The clear-up mirrored the physical recovery of those that had survived. Gaynor's broken legs were mending well. But while in hospital, she'd also had to deal with the news of what had happened to her brother Carl and sister Marilyn.
I asked my dad, were Carl and Marilyn okay? And he said no, he said that they had gone to heaven. And to see my dad with the face and the anguish and the tears and, oh God, you know, you can't imagine looking at him as an 8-year-old, what he was feeling. to sleep with my parents because I didn't want to go in the dark anymore. I started to wet the bed. I'd sleep in the middle, and they'd be soaking wet. I'd be soaking wet when I woke up, and never once did they complain.
Gaynor's family, like many others, struggled through as best they could. Gaynor's own salvation came in writing it all down.
I started to do a diary every day of everything that I felt, and what was happening in the house, what my mum was going through, what my dad was going through, how I felt, how I thought my friends felt.
I asked my father, "Were Carl and Madeline all right? Were Carl and Madeline all right?" He replied in a toned voice. "They are gone." I just couldn't believe it. I didn't cry. The dark frightened me. I started to wet the bed. It was very difficult for my parents. Memories of my past would go through my mind, and I would cry pitifully. I could see someone's hand through a crack in the wall. Bodies lay crushed and buried, and the survivors lay looking at their best friends. Dead.
It was like something trapped in my mind. It was like a ball of all these problems in my mind that I released all onto a diary.
The tribunal had been sitting for 70 days before Lord Robens was sworn in as a witness.
I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Robens was not used to being challenged. He did not like it.
I am not in a position to give specific answers, but I am trying to help him. But he obviously needs some assistance.
Oh, Lord Robens, I'm grateful for your sympathy. The patience that you are seeking to show is a mutual bond between us.
He was very much on the defensive. He was a hostile witness, and he was an awkward person.
I knew that the board's main defense would be based on geology.
Answer my question.
When I was on the mountainside, I realized... Am I not answering your question to your satisfaction?
He gave the impression of being irritated that he should be required to answer any questions.
I do not, in the light of the evidence that has been given before the tribunal...
Would you answer my question?
I would, if I could get the question, answer the question, but I am not quite clear what the question is.
Here was a very powerful person at the very top of a big organization, really turning out to be an incompetent and unhelpful and contradictory witness.
Ackner had already drawn from Robens a startling admission. The Coal Board had spent weeks dodging the blame when they had known all along the disaster had been foreseeable.
Does it come to this? That by the time the tribunal started on November the 29th, that you were by then satisfied that the causes were reasonably foreseeable?
That is so.
I'm obliged.
He did realize before the inquiry started that what happened was foreseeable. So we just wasted time and money, and the wrong decision might have been reached.
After 76 days and 136 witnesses, the tribunal was at an end. Prime Minister Harold Wilson received an advance copy of the tribunal's report. It savaged the Coal Board for its lack of tipping policy. Robert Exley and David Roberts were among 9 officials criticised. But the tipping gang was cleared. On the morning of the report's publication, the villagers of Aberfan queued around the block to buy their copies. The Coal Board was attacked for its attitude to the tribunal, and Lord Robens' evidence dismissed as inconsistent. In the village, there was a meeting to discuss their response to the report.
The Parents and Residents Association of Aberfan fully accept the findings of the tribunal There is no question of their pursuing any vendetta or seeking retribution from those who have been found to be blameworthy.
But 116 children had died, and in the village they believed heads would roll.
Lord Robins, do go through. Mr. Marsh is expecting you.
For Harold Wilson, it all hinged on one question.
Who should we hold responsible? And for Harold, there was no choice. It was Robins.
Promise me, Richard, promise me you'll never have a tribunal like this again. I mean, it was just an inquisition. They wouldn't let me give proper answers. Thank you. It was biased. I mean, what do they mean, that my evidence was inconsistent? Inconsistent?
Look, Alf, it is important that the Coal Board accept the report. It would look bad if you were seen to be criticising the tribunal. You can't refight that one. Alf, you just can't.
Yes. All right, agreed. No criticism, just facts.
Alf? You do know the government might be looking for resignations, don't you?
It would be hateful if people were to go around with long knives looking for victims, Dick.
The subject of Robin's future divided the country and the government.
We had blazing rows over it in Cabinet because I said flatly I was not prepared to be party to his dismissal. Full stop.
Marsh believed that since Aberfan's safety worries had never reached the board, Robins should not be blamed. Those saying Robins should go felt he was responsible for the absence of a tipping policy, the underlying cause of a slide that had killed 116 children. Robins was himself torn. He did not believe he was to blame, but the memory of what he had seen in Aberfan was seared into his mind.
I think that cracked him up. They said to me, he's walked amongst the children, and they said he's crying. And I thought, Alfred crying? They said tears are pouring down his face. And I said, that will break his heart. My God, it did.
Robins was quite tempted to resign on an emotional ground. He really wanted to be persuaded not to resign, but he felt he should, and it would be a good gesture.
But Desmond Ackner, who had spoken for the village for 76 days, was outraged by what now followed.
I don't think Robins ever had any intention of resigning, and I don't think that Marsh had any intention of accepting the resignation. I think it was just for the public consumption.
We went through this, and then I said, well, you send me in your resignation, and I will send you back a letter saying, quite understand it, but I don't accept it.
Quite clearly, his resignation should have been accepted, but it was kicked into the long grass, and that's where it stayed.
In the village, talk had turned to the remaining tips.
Those tips were still up there on the mountainside with a gaping hole in the first tip. And when people were looking up at those, I mean, what were the thoughts? The thoughts were that, what's going to happen with those? Is it going to happen again? And you can't delay those fears whilst the tips were still there.
The villagers hadn't forgotten that Harold Wilson had said the tips must go. But things had changed. They had trusted the coal board, and their children had paid the price. No longer would they put their faith in authority.
I think people thought that whatever was going to follow this particular time, people of the community would have to do it themselves.
The tips in a present form or any other form being there was a constant reminder to a terrible disaster. They lost children, they lost fathers, mothers. There wasn't a residence in Aberfan or Merthyr Vale that wasn't affected in one way or another by that terrible morning. The reality was that everybody, and I mean everybody, to a man, felt that the removal of the tips would be of benefit to the healing of the village. You look at that tip today and you don't realise what was there. It was an horrendous monument, and he didn't want it.
In order to take on the government, the village needed to be organised. The tip removal committee was formed.
Our sole objective of that committee was the removal of the tips. Nothing else, nothing less, nothing more. But to achieve that was a long, long struggle.
The committee embarked on a long series of meetings and consultations aimed at persuading the government to keep its promise and remove the tips. The problem was cost.
The government and the Coal Board, they were stonewalling. We just couldn't get through to them. And that was deliberate on their part, I'm quite sure of that.
I was a lot younger and quite hot-blooded, one might say, in those days, and didn't like no for an answer.
The tip removal committee didn't sit around just talking about things. We went out and looked at things. We went and visited other sites where tips were being removed and reclaimed. So we had some idea of what was involved in removing tips.
Unaccustomed to working-class people challenging the establishment, the authorities couldn't believe the committee hadn't been put up to it. Ordinary folk just didn't do this sort of thing in the South Wales of the 60s.
It was said by a number of people, myself included, that we felt our phones had been tapped and we were being watched. And cars were following us wherever we went. I got no evidence to support that other than the fact in my own mind that was happening. And it wasn't just my mind, it was in the mind of a number of other members of the Aberfan Tip Removal Committee that this was happening.
Under pressure, the government made a concession. Certain the tips were safe, they offered to landscape them. But for Aberfan, this was not enough. So at one meeting, Minister for Power Richard Marsh made another offer.
We will underwrite, i.e. pay for, any firm of engineering contractors in this field internationally and get them to identify whether there is any danger in it at all.
Marsh had always believed their concerns had been about safety. But there was more to it than this. Some villagers were also haunted by the thought that they might have done more to prevent the disaster.
Look, we're quite prepared to believe that these tips are safe. I mean, you'd be very stupid indeed to pretend after all that's happened that they were not.
Look, the real reason we want that tip removed is because we can't stand the sight of the thing.
Okay. Look, many of us know the reasons that no complaints were made.
About the tip, which we knew had got water in it.
We never thought they would do the damage that it did.
No, sure. Look, we believe that if any action was taken...
to remove it?
Or make it safe for a time, you know, the additional cost would have made the pit uneconomic.
And they'd have shut it down.
Yeah, they would have closed the place.
Oh my God.
These were all people who'd grown up for generations mining. They knew about coal mines. And it doesn't mean they were responsible in any way, but nobody blew the whistle. But if it had been raised, there is no doubt in my mind if it were then found to be dangerous, that the pit would have been closed. And that would have meant everybody would have lost their job.
The government was still stonewalling on the tips. There was to be one last meeting with George Thomas, the then Welsh Secretary. A more militant faction of the group decided that they had heard the word no often enough.
They probably thought that what we were doing as a tip removal committee needed to be reinforced. And I think they were possibly right.
A number of us had agreed that if the answer was no, then we would be taking matters into our own hands.
If the government wouldn't come to the mountain, they'd take the mountain to the government. Fearing they were still being watched, Enos's group met in secret and never spoke of their plans on the telephone.
Don't answer it.
He was always prepared to sort of get stuck in, if you like, and show people that we meant business. He was his own man, and a useful man to have around.
The committee travelled to Cardiff, taking bags of slurry with them. The meeting went badly. It was no again. Time for Plan B.
Walked out of his office down the stairs. Pre-arranged. Out of the main doors. Opened the boots. Took 2 bags each. That's what we took in. And he made out of a mess.
We're not playing! We're not playing now! Is this what you want? What is it? This is what it's all about, isn't it? Well, let's see how you act living with the stuff. We move the tip bit by bit. If that's what we want. Go! Go on!
I would say that it achieved the desired effect, insomuch as George Thomas came to the top of the stairs, and when he seen the scuffle that had gone on below, and we were arrested, he shouted down to release us. And he broke down in tears. He said, fetch your committee back up. He went outside, committee went back up, and he said that he himself had reversed the decision and would recommend to the Wilson government that the tips should be removed.
A matter of days later, they announced that they were prepared to remove the tips. We felt a lot of pride in what we had done, actually, and caused a lot of elation. Everybody felt pretty good about all this. It was a big relief to a huge number of people, to know that those things were going to disappear.
Gloria, 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 Gloria. In excelsis Deo.
This was a massive victory for the village. They had taken on and defeated the might of the Wilson government. So what now for Aberfan's tip removal committee?
After deliberating on a number of things, one of the members said, why don't we start a male voice choir? And everyone sort of looked, thought, and reacted positively to that. Why shouldn't we start a male voice choir?
Aberfan's tip removal committee became the Untold male voice choir. For the last 35 years, they have sung for charity all over the world. However, there was to be a sting in the tale of the Tips' triumph. Harold Wilson may have agreed that the Tips should go, but what he now said was that the village had to pay £150,000 towards the costs.
I thought it was abominable, actually, that they should be asking for money to clear tips that someone else had put there.
Myself, I think that was a travesty of justice in the situation as it was. A lot of promises were given initially, in heat of the moment, one might say that. They didn't follow them up with actual actions.
The money was taken from the Aberfan Appeal Fund. For the village, the important thing was that the Tips were going. Today, 40 years on, the Tips have gone. So has the mine. The tragedy of Aberfan is that it was an accident that could and should have been prevented. But in their fight for justice, the village taught the world a lesson. Authority was not always right. It could be challenged, and it could be beaten. Yet, looking back on those terrible days, some are generous in their conclusions.
No individual whatsoever, including Lord Robins, was ever responsible for what happened. I know men were blamed. But I'll go to my grave saying, I don't believe they were guilty.
In others, bewilderment lingers.
There's not one of them had a sack. They didn't even lose their jobs. They didn't have nothing at all. You know? It's wrong, man. They want to start changing the law in this country, you know what I mean?
Some forgive, but nobody forgets.
As I got older, I started drinking a bit heavier to try and forget, but unfortunately it doesn't work that way. If anything, it comes back twice as bad, really.
The physical injuries heal, but obviously it's the mental injuries and scars that never heal, I don't think. It gets easier, but they never heal.
In 1997, the Blair government finally repaid the village's money. Today, it would be worth £1.5 million. All they got was the original amount. That £150,000 is now used to maintain the graves of Aberfan's lost generation.